Good morning, Kahal Kadosh. Shavua Tov u'mevorach to everybody. Today, Sunday, the 24th day of Elul, corresponding to the 13th day of September. We hope that everybody had a beautiful Shabbat, Berashiyot Nitzavim Bayelech, the last Shabbat of the year. But the action continues today, the 24th day of Elul. Today's class has been graciously sponsored by our dear member and friend, Mr. Clement Rahamim Beda Hamuya Kohen, and his children, Le'ilui Nishmat, his beloved wife, their beloved mother, Doret Bat Sofi Aliyah Hashalom, that this week, Be'ezat Hashem, on Tuesday will be her Askara. Iratzon, that through the words of Torah, the Neshama of Doret Bat Sofi have an Aliyah in Gan Eden. Amen. And may HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless her husband, Clement Rahamim Beda Hamuya Kohen, with Arichut Yamim Beshanim Tovot, with health, longevity, happiness. Amen. Today, a most special day in the Jewish calendar. 24th day of Elul, Hilula of the Hafetz Haim, Rabbi Israel Meir HaKohen, the great giant, the Gadol Ador, who born 1835, passed away 1933, author of over 20 Sefarim, and many of them very famous, Mishnah Berura, Shemirat Lashon, Ahavat Chesed, and many more, that without any hesitation, the topic of Shemirat Lashon, the topic of how careful a person needs to be when they speak, it has a tremendous amount of awareness thanks to the great Hafetz Haim. Our rabbis tell us that in the day of the Hilulah of Tzaddikim, talking about them, learning from the Sefarim, creates a special, let's call it spiritual bonding between us and the Tzaddik. What better attorney to have in Shamayim for Rosh Hashanah coming up like the great Hafetz Haim. With that being said, I'd like to, the first part of the class today, dedicated to some of the valuable lessons of the Hafetz Haim. Zechuto yagen aleinu. Amen. So the Hafetz Haim, in the introduction to the Shemirat HaLashon book, he brings, we're not going to go through the entire concept, but I'd like to go over some of the highlights. And it says the following. The Torah reveals to us that the words that we use, the way we speak to people, it helps us to determine what kind of life the person has. And the more control that we have in the way we express ourselves, the more control we are going to have in our daily life. Let's clarify that the control that we are referring to at this moment is self-control, of restraining myself, of not saying things that are hurtful, which is gossip, or slandering someone, or talking about someone in a negative or in a derogatory manner. As I said earlier today is an action-packed day in the Jewish world. Obviously, everyone preparing for Rosh Hashanah, but Baruch Hashem, Torah learning, despite the restrictions that we have in certain places, Torah learning continues. especially through the power of technology. So earlier today, I gave a class in Argentina, from here, from Miami. I didn't go anywhere. They prepare a day of Torah learning with 30 congregations, 25 speakers throughout the day. And my mazal was to be the first speaker of the day after a beautiful Selihot and Shaharit prayer. And the reason I was asked to be the first, they wanted me to speak later on, but obviously my Torah relationship takes precedent, so therefore they were kind enough to accommodate that I speak at 8:30 in the morning. I'm finished on time to be with you today. So I finished that class in Spanish, stating that if the Hafetz Haim today will be alive, he will not only will say Shemirat HaLashon, but he will also say Shemirat HaYadayim or Shemirat HaEsba'ot. Shemirat HaLashon means the tongue. But today, Lashon Hara doesn't need to be spoken. Lashon Hara can be texted, can be WhatsApped, can be posted on any of the social media platforms that people have access to it. How many times you hear in the news about a derogatory post on Twitter or any other matter that they use? So Lashon Hara today, in the 21st century, doesn't need to be spoken, can be written, and the consequences are not different. But because the Hafetz Haim talks about Shemirat HaLashon, the tongue, so today we are going to speak about the tongue of the person. David HaMelech, and I'll bring over the book of Tehillim. David HaMelech writes in the book of Tehillim, chapter 34, Mi ha'isha hafetz haim, who is the person that desires life? Who doesn't desire life? Every person wants life. Every person wants to live happy, healthy, good life, without headaches. So David HaMelech gives us the formula. Mi ha'isha hafetz haim, who truly deserves life, or desires life. Ohev yamim lirot tov. Love your days to see only the good. This is part of our Shabbat morning prayers. The chapter of Tehillim, LeDavid b'shanoto ta'amo lifnei Avimelech, right in the middle of the chapter. That's the pasuk that I'm quoting now. So it says here, the Hafetz Haim, why does David HaMelech, when talks about wanting life, he says, see good? So the Hafetz Haim answers. It says, Lir'ot et hatov bazulat ubahaim. It says that when a person trains themselves to see things in a positive angle, from a positive perspective, for our friends, for our spouses, for our relatives, and throughout life, that creates a positive effect on the way that we communicate, in the way that we speak, in the way that we transmit messages throughout life. Everybody, I'm sure, is very meticulous in the laws of kashrut. Kosher meat, kosher cheese, kosher milk, Halav Israel, Bishul Israel, Kemach Yashan, Halak Bet Yosef. All these are terms which are halachically binding in the topic of kosher food. But as they said, why you only worry about what goes in your mouth? What about what goes out of the mouth of the person? And we know very well why so much emphasis is being made on the topic of kashrut, of kosher food. I believe the answer is we are what we eat. And what we eat as Yehudim not only has an effect on the body of the person, but it has an effect on the neshama of the person, has an effect on the blood of the person, has an effect on the heart of the person. So if God forbid the food that we eat does not correspond to the loss of kashrut, what exactly we are doing to our body and to our soul? We are contaminating our neshama. That is a kashrut 101 lesson. So the Hafetz Haim is telling us, Rabotai, like you are careful what goes in, be careful what goes out. And the less we speak, the better. And I mentioned this the other day, but it's apropos in the name of the Hafetz Haim, that a person who bolem piv, a person when he has the urge or the desire to say something and he controls himself, what is the benefit of the person? So I think this is said in the name of the Gaon of Vilna, Zoche leor haganuz. The person will merit an exposure to a hidden light. She'en malach uberiya yecholim lekabel. That no angel or other creation are able to absorb from that light of godliness. Yani, this is VIP treatment. And Sefer Hasidim brings this down. And he said the following: as long as the words stayed inside of us, we are in charge. We are in the driver's seat of our life. But once the words come out, we become the slave of the word. And we attain ourselves to the consequences of whatever content our statement had. And Lashon Hara, I like to clarify this, is not limited only to speaking bad about another person. Lashon Hara is the way a person speaks overall. For example, how many times in our Torah we have the sin of Lashon Hara? A few. I'm going to just throw a couple of them on the table. And then we'll continue. From the creation of the world, Adam and Hava. God comes to Adam. I'm giving you the short version. And what does Adam say? The lady, the wife that you gave me, she gave me to eat. Lashon Hara about the wife. Then goes to the snake. Later on, we'll skip Noah for now. Later on, Hagar and Sara, the derogatory way that Hagar was talking to Sara Imenu. Later on, Yosef and his brothers. Later on, Moshe Rabbeinu. When God, after a week of negotiations with Moshe, Moshe finally accepts the mission. Redeem the Jewish people. What does Moshe Rabbeinu say? Bim lo ya'aminu bi. What will be if they don't trust me? They don't believe in me. What God says to Moshe, take your hands, put it inside your coat, bring your hand out, and what the Pasuk says, Behine yado mesorat kashaleg. His hand was afflicted by leprosy. Like the Rambam Maimonides writes, that this concept of tzara'at is not a natural thing. It's a godly given consequence to the person for the way they speak. So Moshe, even before going to Egypt and telling the people, I'm here on a godly mission to take you out of Egypt, already he said Lashon Hara against the Jewish people. Fast forward, Miriam HaNeviah. I'm only bringing just isolated examples just to understand the severity of this action. And that's a reason why the Talmud writes in tractate Baba Messiah, the Talmud says that there are three ways of hurting people: financially, physically, and verbally. And the Talmud concludes, the verbal wound is the most difficult one to heal and to repair. The Zohar says, talking bad about another person, it affects three people: the person who spoke about it, the person that listened, and the person that was spoken about. The one who talked, the one who listened, and the third person, Hazid. And you may say, what's the guilty verdict on that person? He wasn't around. True. But his actions gave the opportunity to someone to speak. And we need to remind ourselves that Lashon Hara refers when the comment is true. Because if the comment is not true, it's Motzi Shem Ra. That's called slander. The Avon is even greater for slandering. But before we switch the topic, I'd like to bring a verse which is part of our daily prayers. At the end of the Amidah, remember the pasuk that I quoted before? Chapter 34 of Tehillim, Mi ha'isha hafetz haim ohev yavim lir'ot tov. What is the next verse from that chapter 34? Is actually a pasuk that we say every day of our life. At the end of the Amidah, doesn't matter the day of the year, Rosh Hashanah, Kippur, Sukkot, Sha'B'Av, Rosh Chodesh, Hol HaMoed, weekday, Shabbat including. The last paragraph of the Amidah. How does the last paragraph starts? Elokai, my God, that means. Nesor leshoni mera. Guard my tongue from evil. Besiftotai midaber mirma. And my lips from speaking in a deceitful way. This is the continuation of the previous pasuk that quotes the Hafetz Haim in the book of Tehillim. Mi ha'isha Hafetz Haim. Who is the person who truly desires life? Ohev yamim lir'ot tov. We love the days to see the goodness. And as the introduction says, the more good we see, the better we'll speak. The more positive we are going to speak. And what better way to prepare ourselves for the new year coming up, to try to work in this particular concept. I'd like to bring two more short concepts before we go to Tomer Devora, and to combine an interesting part of Tomer Devora with today's Shemirat HaLashon message from the great Hafetz Haim. And The Zohar brings a pasuk from the book of Tehillim that says, Lashon medaberet gedolot. That's tongue that speaks a lot. You know, last night, according to our tradition, we did Hatarat Nedarim, nullifications of vows, promises, and curses. For those that were not able to make it, we are going to do it again Thursday, in person and via Zoom, based on the rulings of the Chief Rabbi of Israel, that those that were unable to come, to give a chance to do it via Zoom. So details will be forthcoming for our Kahal here in Florida. One of the Hatarot that we did last night was the Hatara of Nidui. Nidui means excommunication or rejection. Now, what has to do that with nullifying vows or promises? Short answer, that when a person makes a promise, the pasuk says, Mosa sefatecha tishmor ve'asita. Whatever you say, you must fulfill. Your wife, your word, Mehila, your word is your ticket to life. Your word, my word, is my signature. I don't need to sign. How many times people in English, they say, I give you my word. Regretfully, we live in a society that giving the word is not 1,000% legitimate. Needs to be put in writing. But from a halakha perspective, your word is your signature. But yet, we made this special prayer last night that in the event our prayers are in suspense, our prayers are stuck in traffic. Why they can get stuck in traffic, prayers of a person? Very simple. If we made a promise and we didn't keep that promise is lingering on the suspense file. And Shamaim says, let's see who is the executor of this promise. Oh, this person? Okay, let's put his prayers on hold until he makes good on his promise. How long does a prayer can get stuck in the heavenly realms for not keeping a promise? 40 days. 40 yom. And that's why the first Hatara was 40 days before Rosh Hashanah, right after Tisha B'Av, Tu B'Av. For this reason, we do it in advance. And there are many other transgressions that, God forbid, put the prayers on hold, not going anywhere. One more, wearing sha'atnes. God forbid, a person wears a garment that contains the Torah prohibition of the mixture of wool and linen. Every instant is a transgression from the Torah. And that causes that the body of the person, God forbid, is surrounded by a transgression of the Torah. And therefore the words of the tefillah cannot leave even the body of the person because they are surrounded by an aura called sha'atnez. That if you heard me talking about this topic last week when we had a beautiful campaign at our synagogue, and people were so thankful and so responsive because many people bought suits for the holiday, and they get a phone call from the rabbi, your suit contains sha'atnez in the collar. I'm going to remove it. I'm going to give you a kosher piece to put back. Your sha'atnez is found on the shoulder pads. Those two things are repairable. But there were some phone calls who said, regretfully, you must return the suit because the sha'atnez is in the fabric. And if you look at the word sha'atnez, it gives you the word Satan as the brazen evil inclination. Now, this is not about Sha'adnes today. Today is about the Hafetz Haim and the way we speak. But why the promise, the unkept promise, it affects our prayers? Very simple. Because the promise is connected to the aspect of words. Words that comes from the mouth of the person. Lashon Hara is the same. The Zohar says, according to the Gemara, Lashon Hara is worse than idolatry and adultery. Even murder. Don't kill anybody, Haz v'shalom. Spiritually, the damage is greater. Why? In all the three above mentioned sins, the Torah says, Gedolah, big. Lashon Hara, Gedolot, huge. Because it has a domino effect that affects a lot of people. How many times people post things online and comments, negative comments, derogatory comments, as I said before. You know, somebody asked me after the minyan today, how can somebody speak Lashon Hara silently? We understand talking, we understand typing, texting, posting, but guess what? Let's say you come to me and you ask me about someone. I don't say a word. What do? Like this with my hands. That motion, it means, forget about it. That's simple. I don't have even to speak about it. So we understand that that part of this part of the mouth can get easily contaminated by the way we speak, how we speak, when do we speak, and when we stay quiet. This is the Hafetz Haim's words in the in the topic in the book of Shemirat HaLashon. Before we go to the Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, I'm going to drop something on the table, and we are not going to go through the entire list. But before I go to that, I'd like to say the following. There is a concept in the topic of Lashon Hara called Lashon Hara Leto'elet. Saying Lashon Hara for a purpose. There is such a concept. And I'm sure each rabbi of whatever the audience comes from will guide them when a situation arises. For example, sometimes people ask you an advice about to invest someone, or they ask you a question about somebody for a shidduch, or they ask you overall a question about a person. Even that you need to protect the one who is asking you, you're not going to let someone invest with someone that has a reputation of not being honest. And the person can say Kaddish on that money. But then you're going to say, no, I'm Shomer Shemirat HaLashon. I don't speak bad. And then you let the person drown? Is another Torah prohibition. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. You can't stand idle by the blood of your brother. So you need to protect the person. And there are ways of how to say it without hurting someone else. One of the things that I tell people is make sure to protect yourself. Without going into details. He said, I saw many people throughout the years getting hurt. Protect yourself. Ask for a cosigner, ask for a collateral, etc. Or sometimes for a partnership. So you know what? Different personalities. Yeah, one is a crook and one is an honest person. But you can camouflage it a bit or a shidduch. Sometimes you have to say cultural differences or huge discrepancies in the spiritual level. You gotta find the right word and the way that will be less damaging. It happened to me the other day, and I was dreading this phone call because this person told me in shul, I'll call you about a shidduch, ta 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 ta. And I already knew where this phone call was going to go. And when he called me, I made a prayer. After that, before he called me, I said, Borei Olam, I know that this fellow is going to call me. Tell me the right words to say. I don't know what to say. But the shidduch is not a match for many reasons. So I told this person, I hear you, but I believe that someone else is working on a different fellow for this young lady. So I don't feel comfortable that I know through her family of calling about someone else. And I was very happy that the fellow says, Rabbi, thank you so much. I'm not going to pursue it. If anything changes, let me know. Now, I'm not telling you that this is exactly how you should do it. But this is in part what the Hafetz Chaim says. Try to minimize saying things against another person. You may say, does it make a difference between a Yehudi and a Goy? I asked this question to a great rabbi from Israel many years back. And he told me that although the Lashon Hara usually is among Yehudim, but a person should not train themselves to say Lashon Hara, because once we are in that channel, so to speak, eventually, God forbid, the person will not make a difference. With this being said, I'm going to throw something on the table. Could be a wake-up call for all of us. The Hafetz Chaim brings it. So I'm only delivering his message. Although he passed away over, give or take, 80 some years ago, but the lessons of the Hafetz Chaim, if 100 years ago with the limited communication level that we had, it was already an issue in the history of humanity, like the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa and others, Rabbi Akiva, and stories of the destruction of the temple, etc. So imagine yourself that today we don't need to be next to each other to talk to each other. We have Zoom. iTorah is a one-way platform. But when we have Zoom, for example, or the different video formats available to mankind, to society, we can see each other. And therefore, if then was relevant, today for sure it's relevant. The Hafetz Chaim says that a person who talks or listens Lashon Hara could come across 31 transgressions from the Torah. I repeat, 31 transgressions from the Torah. I have the list. This is the Hafetz Chaim. I'm sure everybody remembers him. Here it says 17 negative commandments, and he brings the source of each and every one of them, and 14 positive commandments of the Torah. Doesn't mean that every time we say Lashon Hara, automatically we are crossing 31 commandments from the Torah, negative and positive. Probably yes, but probably no. But the potential is there. And that's the reason why. Put the Sefarim on the side. We're going to welcome back Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. And although we learned this lesson maybe a week ago, but I think that today it requires an encore presentation Let me open up quickly the Sefer. You remember when we started to learn, maybe a week or so ago, the different parts of the face of the person? We spoke about the forehead and the eyes and the ears and the nostrils. And we also spoke about the mouth of the person. So today, we're going to review the mouth of the person. In the afternoon, we have a special class, Panama, that will be in Spanish. And they asked me to speak about the face of the person. That will be in Spanish. But today we'll speak in English, and we're going to speak with the mouth of the person. So it says 3 or 4 lines, and we'll wrap the class today. Piv lo yotzi ella tova. It says Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. Your mouth, in Spanish they say, uno tiene que tener la boca por hermosura. Could be a Turkish saying or Spanish saying, but it says as follows: a person must have a beautiful mouth, and that beauty of the mouth doesn't apply to dentistry or to teeth whitening or mouth washing or plaque removal. No, it refers what flourishes from my mouth, what comes out of the mouth of the person. And therefore it says, Piv, the mouth of the person, lo yotzi ella tova. Only good things should come out of the mouth of the person. And the footnote quotes the great Reshit Chochmah that says, because through the power of speech, the Shekhinah, God's presence, reveals itself outside of the body. What does it mean? We discussed this topic in the past, that the body has an neshama. The body has like an engine called the soul of the person, a sample of God in our life. This is what gives us the movement, the motions, the smelling, the listening, the seeing, and speaking. But from all of these faculties or senses that we discuss now, only the mouth reveals itself. If I move my hand, you only see a movement. That's all. There is no noise. There is no side effects. I'm moving my mouth. If I look or I close my eyes, it's like nothing. I'm not making any noise. But the moment that I speak, suddenly there is noise. I speak, you listen. Or you speak, and I listen. And then the brain starts processing. So it says in Reshit Chochmah, Ki adibur haba la'adam hi me'ashechina. Every time the mouth of the person opens up, we are activating the revelation of godliness coming out of our body, of our mouth. And that's why the Pasuk says, Al tebahel al picha. Don't be exciting, or don't be like desperate to release your mouth, meaning to say, to answer back. Why? She'ashechina hi al picha. Because godliness becomes revealed as words come out of our mouth. And that's the reason why David HaMelech says in the book of Tehillim, Im tishkevun ben sefatayim. Im tishkevun, if you will lay down between your teeth, between your lips. Who is David HaMelech referring to? Says Reshit Chokhmah, and also the Zohar Kadosh writes that Shekhinah, godliness, dwells in this part of the body. And that's a reason why. This part of the body, known as the mouth, is the Sephirah of Malchut, is God's revelation in the name of kingdom. Because I can open and close my eyes, I can move my hands, okay. But once I say something, my actions can become an arrow, can become a spear, can become a bullet, can become a knife, or can be soothing, pleasant, uplifting, meaningful, and positive. Where do we learn it from? So continues and it says, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, ולא יוציא מפיו דבר מגונה ולא קללה. Never allow your mouth to release inappropriate words or curses, God forbid. That's why last night we also made hatarat kelalot. Now, what is these unpleasant ways of speaking? Because today is the day that I need to say this, I have to say it, although we did discuss this in the past. But this is the source that Rabbi Moshe Cordovero brings today. Gemara Pesachim, Tractate of Pesachim, page 3, Amud Bet, and it says, Le'olam, forever, al yotzi adam davar megune mipiv. The person should never bring out anything negative or unpleasant from their mouth. I ask you a question. Why the Gemara in Pesachim that has to do with Hames and Matzah teaches me the way I talk? Save that for Nedarim, a different type tractate. Why specifically in Pesachim? So for me to answer that question, we need to learn together the first line of the Mishnah in Pesachim. The Mishnah begins, Or le'arba'a asar, to the light of the 14th of Nisan, Bodkim et hames le'or haner. We search for the hames to the candle, to the light of the candle. So comes right away the Gemara and it says, I don't understand. My or. What's the meaning of the word or? If I ask you, or means what? Day or night? So, Peshat, tomorrow, 25th day of Elul, is the first day of the creation of the world. And we're going to read Bereshit at the end of the prayer, just the first day of creation, the way it says. And we say, or. What's the meaning of or? Or means light. So light, technically speaking, means daytime. So if or means daytime, why do I need a candle? I don't need a flashlight at this moment of the day. I have natural light. So or means night. So استنى شوية. If or means night, why didn't you start the Talmud Mishnah of Pesachim by telling me Leil Arba'a Asar, to the night of the 14th of Nisan, you search for the Hames, to the light of the candle. It makes a lot of sense. But the Mishnah said or. The Gemara says, you know why? The Mishnah wants to avoid using an unpleasant word. And what is this unpleasant word? Laila. Night. Night is darkness. Darkness is the lack of light. The lack of presence of light is darkness. A Jew is never in darkness. Ki yesheb b'choshech Hashem orli. Even when I'm surrounded by darkness, God is my light. And what proof the Talmud brings from the Torah that the Torah is meticulous in this way? Short answer, the story of Noah. Remember Noah? Right after Perashah Bereshit, God commands Noah, build the teva and bring animals to the teva. Whoever survives the flood will be the fundamental creature or creation for the new world after the Mabul. And God says to Noah, Mina behema tehora, o mina behema asher enena tehora. From the animal which is pure and the animal which is not pure. And the Gemara says, hold on a minute. Why do you have to say asher enena tehora, which is not pure? Tell me pure and impure. It says no. Perashat Noah is not the perashah that the Torah wants to teach us about kosher animals. God is communicating with Noah for a specific circumstance. When he will come to Perashat Shemini, that is the loss of kashrut and the loss of the kosher animals, so the Torah will tell me pure, impure. But when today I'm only giving you guidelines about the teva, why should I use the word impure if I can say which is not pure? It's like the difference between bad and not good. Disaster could be better. Problem, situation. This is the Hafetz Haim. This is Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. Joint effort with these two giants. Can you imagine now in Shamayim suddenly we have two attorneys. One, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, and one, the Hafetz Haim. Can you imagine the zechut that we have at this moment? So in the zechut of these two tzaddikim, let us take advantage of the final week of the year to grab as many mitzvot and ma'asim tovim and pleasant ways of being. And I guarantee you that the better we become in this topic, not only of gossip or slander, etc., but just the way we talk to each other, complimenting and less complaining, more positive reinforcement than criticism, guaranteed return, that the tefillah will be affected in a positive way. Otherwise, what happens, God forbid, if a person has a person eats not kosher? What happens to the mouth of the person? What happens to the neshama of the person? It gets contaminated. And that affects our prayers. Guess what? The vocabulary and the words and the way we speak, also it affects our prayers. As the Zohar Kadosh says, quoted by the Hafetz Haim, that during the time of the Bet HaMikdash, the consequence of Lashon Hara was sarat, a godly given punishment that required quarantine. That's where quarantine comes from the Torah. The whole quarantine word that we are listening in our day-to-day basis, it's Perashat Tazria. Beizgiro HaKohen Shiv'at Yamim Shanit. Badad Yeshev Michutz LaMachane Moshavo. Those two pesukim is the quarantine concept that mankind today became very familiar with. So it says in Hafetz Haim that God took a trade between leprosy and financial hardship or poverty. Because if God forbid, a person will be affected by Sara'at, that person's life will come to an end, will be isolated, separated, until the day that Mashiach comes, which you hope and pray that is going to come as soon as I finish the class, unless he wants to come now and I give him the mic over. This is the Hafetz Chaim message to us today in his Elulah, the 24th day of Elul. Yiratzon, that the Zechut of the Hafetz Chaim and the Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, Zechutam Yagen Alenu, may the merit shield us, and we express our gratitude to Mr. Clemon Rahamim Beda Hamuya Kohen and his children for graciously sponsoring today's class, Le'ilun Nishmat, his beloved wife, their beloved mother, Doret Bat Sofi Alea Hashalom. Shavua Tov u'Mevorach, Tizku Leshanim Rabot to everyone. Have a beautiful day. Kol Tov.